Well, hi there, Miss Maybee's class. I hope you're all doing well today. My name is Bryan Bachman, and I wanted to thank you so much for the letter you sent over to the station a few weeks ago, asking all of those great questions about snow. And of course, it's a great time of year to be talking about snow, since lately we've been seeing quite a bit of it, along with those really cold temperatures. So hopefully you've been staying warm, but also having a chance to have some fun in that snow. I wanted to take a couple of minutes here today to actually answer the questions that you sent in your letter. So let's take a look at the first one, and that was, how does snow fall from the sky? Well, in order to answer that question, we first have to answer another one, and that's, how do we make snow? Essentially, how do we build a snowflake so that when they all come down, they'll blanket the ground and we can have some fun? Well, it actually all starts way up in the clouds on a cold, cold day. A lot of times in those clouds, you'll get these tiny little crystals of ice that are so small you can't even see them with the naked eye. You would need a big, big magnifying glass or a microscope. They're so small. But these crystals of ice, since they're so tiny, they're picked up by the wind and they move around all over the place. And as those ice crystals move around within the cloud, they'll also oftentimes bump into little drops of water that are hanging out up there in the clouds with them. And as the ice crystal bumps into a little drop of water, well, that drop of water freezes onto that ice crystal and makes it just a little bit bigger. And that process can happen thousands and thousands of times as the ice crystal just gets picked up and blown all over the place in the cloud. As it gradually starts to fall to the ground, it bumps into more and more of those little drops of water. They keep freezing on, and gradually the snowflake becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually grows into all kinds of interesting shapes like these, depending on exactly, how it falls to the ground. Sometimes when we get a snowflake to form, it starts with this little ice crystal in the middle here, but then it'll almost grow off into little like flower leaves or leaves of other plant on the end of it here. Sometimes the ends of a snowflake, they'll almost look like little webbed feet, as if they were like little duck feet, things like that. Sometimes they almost look like pine needles on a Christmas tree. They'll develop all these tiny little needle-like appendages that are kind of reaching out away from the center. Other times they take on just a plain old ice appearance, for lack of a better term. Sometimes they're lazy and they just come down to these big hexagon-shaped flat discs. And other times too, they all almost look like little holly trees, like the holly that you might see, on a Christmas wreath or something like that. So they come down in these different shapes and sizes. And the whole reason that they start to fall in the first place, to answer your question, well, they start to fall when they become too heavy for the wind in the air and the air to basically keep them afloat. They come too heavy, even if they're not all that big, they become too heavy to stay afloat in the air, and they gradually and gently start to fall to the ground. You get millions and millions and millions of these things during a snowstorm, and of course, if you get enough, they blanket the ground. And that actually ties us into the second question you asked, which is, why is snow white? And this one, you can kind of think of it like the snow is playing a little bit of a trick on you. So the answer's a little tricky, but it actually all has to do with that big ball of light that we see up in the sky, the sun. Sunlight, pure sunlight, is actually just plain white light. So it all starts there. We get the white rays of the sunlight coming down from the sun, and they hit the ground on a fresh snowpack, maybe the day after a snowstorm. We get the nice deep blue sky, the sun comes back out, that white sunlight comes down, hits the snow that's on the ground, and that's where the snowflakes, and the thousands and thousands of them that are sitting on the ground, that's where they play a little bit of a trick on our eyes. They take that white sunlight that's coming in, hits the snow, and they reflect it, or bounce it back up. And when that reflected sunlight off of the snow bounces up and hits our eyes, to us as human beings, it looks white. And it's simply because it's taking the white light of the sun that's coming in and reflecting it, bouncing it back up into our eyes so that we see the snow as if it were white. So kind of a little visual trick, like I said, that the snow tends to play on you and makes it look white. Now, granted, if you add some mud to the equation, we all know what the snow tends to look like after snow plows come through. That can make the snow look a little more funky and a little more muddy, but at least pure snow is white because of that reflected sunlight. And then we go to your next question. Why is snow cold? And it actually kind of goes back to what we were talking about a few moments ago. We talked about how snowflakes start as tiny little ice crystals. They're just collections of growing ice crystals. And we all know what it's like to try to hold an ice cube in our hands. You can only do it for so long before it gets too cold. So snowflakes are made of ice, and ice, as you remember, is frozen water. And water can only freeze into ice if the temperature of the water reaches 32 degrees, the freezing point, or drops below that. So if it's 32 degrees or colder, that water can freeze into ice, which is essentially what a snowflake starts as and stays as. But we also need another factor. We need the air itself around the snowflake to stay cold enough. So the air also has to be 32 degrees or colder, so that when those snowflakes start falling out of the clouds and they fall through that air, they don't just melt as they start to fall out of the clouds and turn into rain or freezing rain or sleet or anything like that. So snow is cold because it's made of ice, and you need cold conditions to have ice in the first place. And then your final question, well, why does it snow in winter? Well, that one's an easy one. Winter is just the time of year where we tend to have our coldest weather here in Michigan. It's where, we get a couple of months here where the temperatures, usually stay near or below freezing during the day, and especially when it gets really cold at night. But believe it or not, it actually can snow at any time of the year as long as the temperatures are cold enough. So it could be the middle of July. We could be in the middle of summer. Normally when it's hot, the temperatures are in the 80s, the 90s, it's humid, it's a summer day, you want to be heading off to the pool or heading out on the boat or something with mom or dad. But if all of a sudden in the middle of July, middle of summer, we see the temperatures drop into the 30s or 20s, which are cold enough for ice and potentially snowflakes, and if we were to get a storm system to come through at that time, it wouldn't be out of the question to, in the middle of July, actually see some snowfall. And kind of on a similar point here, believe it or not, in the Flint area, where you guys go to school, we've actually seen snow in spring, way out toward the end of the school year. Usually when the weather's warming up and the flowers are blooming, we've seen it snow in spring. Back in 1961, almost 60 years ago, we actually saw on May 26th that year, some measurable snow in Flint, and it wasn't just like a little bit coming down and then melting on the ground. It actually accumulated, and you briefly had a blanket of snow on the ground, even though it wasn't winter and we were seeing our warmer temperatures come in. So we usually see most of our snow in winter because that's when the weather is usually cold enough for long enough to create that snow. But it's not out of the question. You'd need some very special circumstances, but you could realistically see snow at any time of the year as long as the temperatures were cold enough. That's it for all the questions you guys sent me. I want to thank you again so much for sending those along, and I hope you enjoyed watching the video here as much as I've had the chance to talk to you guys today. Thank you again to you guys and to Ms. Maybee for sending the letter along. I'll be keeping that letter that you sent me right here in the weather office with me, and I'll be sure to hang on to that forever at this point. I really appreciate you guys again sending that along, and I hope I was able to answer your snow questions. And if you have any more, don't be shy about asking. Maybe as we roll into spring, and maybe if you have some new weather questions, maybe you guys can write another letter if you have more. I'll be very, very happy to answer them. But that'll do it for me here today, guys. I'll wish you the best on your day of class here. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great rest of your winter, and stay warm, but enjoy the snow too, everybody.